These are 10 real World War I vehicles that military historians still find difficult to explain. Resembling improvised scrap metal projects, they move like broken carnival rides. Actual engineers constructed every single one, believing with total confidence that they had found the answer to modern warfare. Nobody knew how to construct a tank in 1914. Since combat arrived before the technology did, armies tested concepts rapidly. Some of those designs were highly unusual. Muddy trenches, miles of barbed wire, and defensive guns turned open fields into killing grounds. The harsh conditions pushed designers toward solutions that grew stranger with every passing month. A few prototypes quietly faded after a single test, while others made it to the battlefield. A handful failed so publicly that the disaster itself became famous. These 10 machines show exactly how developers tried to solve the trench problem. Number 10 brings us the Kresowiec, an improvised combat rig pieced together in 1919 during the fighting around Lviv. Polish fighters lacked factory support and had no time to wait for a proper blueprint. They grabbed an old Praga motor plow, welded thick iron plates over every accessible surface, and called it a tank. The result resembled a rolling iron tent. Up front, large solid metal drive wheels pointed the way. At the back, a vertical sheet met a flat horizontal roof, giving the whole rig a boxy shape that looked completely out of place on a dirt road. It rolled at a low speed while generating extreme noise. The vehicle moved and provided cover, fulfilling the exact requirement the troops requested. The French Saint-Chamond hit the battlefield in 1917, demonstrating the consequences of prioritizing firepower over balance. By attaching a heavy artillery piece to the very front, the weapon hung well past the edge of the tracks. This machine carried most of its weight over open space. Every time it crossed a trench or hit a slope, that heavy nose dropped straight into the mud. The vehicle planted itself face first into the earth repeatedly. Factories pumped out hundreds of these before anyone addressed the weight distribution issue. It eventually saw combat, but units spent a large portion of their careers stuck at odd angles in the dirt. German engineers brought the Treffaswagen to the drawing table in 1916. They made a distinct design choice and rejected Caterpillar tracks entirely. Designers fitted it with two steel wheels on either side that were wide and heavy. A large steering roller sat at the back to guide the vehicle. This gave the design the silhouette of a plated crop crawler. Those wheels crushed obstacles reasonably well because mass and momentum handled most blockades. This creation could not steer with any precision, and it struggled on uneven ground. It presented a profile so wide it became an easy target from almost every angle. Military officials tested it, noted the flaws, and canceled the project. Before the British military settled on the tank designs that defined the Western Front, they tested several distinct alternatives. The Pedrail Landship emerged in 1915, utilizing an unusual track system built around interlocking mechanical feet rather than a continuous belt. This setup gave it a movement that looked distinctly robotic. Initial concepts called for it to carry a heavy cannon and troops, though a later plan in 1916 involved a flamethrower. That addition would have made it one of the most intimidating weapons of the entire conflict. Every version of the Pedrail that engineers produced turned out heavier than the terrain could support. The Army walked away from the project before it reached the front, leaving behind one of the most impractical prototypes ever assembled. Germany rushed the A7V to production in 1918. It holds the title of the only German tank produced during the war, with workers completing just 20 units. Weighing 33 tons, it required 18 crew members to operate. The interior stayed packed shoulder to shoulder, with men sweating in heat, loud engine noise, and thick exhaust fumes. From the outside, it looked just like a giant steel box, rectangular and flat. It rolled across the battlefield awkwardly. The heavy build made it difficult to manage on soft ground, and its high center of gravity caused it to tip over on steep slopes. Packing nearly 24 soldiers into a single hull proved highly inefficient. At number 5 sits the American Tracklayer Best 75, assembled in 1917 by a company that normally manufactured agricultural equipment. Their approach was direct. They took a working civilian tractor, dropped a rounded steel shell over the top, bolted a gun to the roof, and presented it to the Army as a combat vehicle. That shell featured a boat-like curve that was very smooth for something welded onto civilian gear. The whole combination looked like two different vehicles merged together. Commanders used it mainly for training and publicity photographs. As a proof of concept, it pointed toward a useful idea, but as a weapon, it lacked any practical application. Alexander Porokhovchikov took a different direction in 1915 with the Russian Vezdekhod. Where other engineers were scaling up, Porokhovchikov scaled down. Carrying a crew of 1 or 2 people, this tiny rig sat low to the ground. It used a single, wide continuous track underneath rather than 2 separate ones, with small side wheels handling steering. The resulting shape was smooth and curved. It gave the vehicle a resemblance to an iron slug crossing the mud. Leaders never put it into production. A one-man prototype tank raised serious questions about what its driver was supposed to do upon arriving at the enemy position. The American skeleton tank emerged in 1918 to solve a specific problem in an unconventional way. Heavy tanks were sinking into the muddy ground of the Western Front because they concentrated too much weight in a confined footprint. According to the designers who pitched this concept, the answer was simply removing most of the mass. Finished prototypes used an open framework of iron pipes shaped into a diamond, with a modest protected box sitting in the middle for the crew. At 9 tons, it weighed about a third of comparable models. Looking like an unfinished construction project, the layout impressed the testers because it functioned exactly as intended. Louis Boirault crafted his namesake invention between 1914 and 1915, and the Boirault Machine remains one of the strangest failures ever assembled. Developers placed an 80-horsepower engine inside a central cabin, then surrounded that space with 6 large iron plates arranged in a rotating cage. Each plate flipped forward in sequence to propel the rig across the ground. This visual effect landed somewhere between a hamster wheel and a mechanical caterpillar. It ground along at approximately 1 mile per hour. Anyone could walk beside it at a casual pace and outrun it easily. Troops tested it against barbed wire to fulfill its intended purpose. It crushed the barricades, but crawling at that pace made it useless in any real tactical situation. The Tsar Tank stands out significantly from the rest of the machines. Russian engineer Nikolai Lebedenko engineered it in 1914, deciding to use no tracks at all. It ran on 2 front wheels that stood 27 feet tall, paired with a small rear wheel for balance. This gave the finished design the appearance of an oversized tricycle. Rolling over most obstacles without slowing, the engineering behind those front wheels functioned properly. That capability surprised observers at the early test. That rear wheel carried too much of the total weight and sank immediately into soft ground, leaving the entire contraption stranded in place. After testing it in 1915, the Russian army concluded it lacked mobility. They abandoned it in a forest, where it rusted for years. It remains a visually striking creation devised for a war it never fought in. Every one of these inventions came from the mind of someone who genuinely believed they had the answer. Creators behind the Tsar Tank, the Skeleton Tank, and all the rest were working without blueprints. They had no precedent and no set standard for what success was supposed to look like. Drop your favorite from this list in the comments and subscribe. Next up, we cover the most dangerous experimental aircraft ever flown in secret, and those stories feature designs that pushed aviation to its absolute limits.